And would you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, for you are the King, and you are the Redeemer. Amen. Between now and the beginning of Lent, I'm going to use my sermons to give us an opportunity to consider children in the Bible. Now, I'm not going to be looking at the traditional well-known stories of children in the Bible, you know, David killing Goliath, or Jesus in the temple, or young Samuel hearing God call him. I'm going to spend time looking at children and at passages in the Bible that we normally don't notice, we might not even know exist. And as we do so, we're going to find out what they teach us, not only about our children today, but also about us and our relationship with God. So back in the days of the Bible, children were obviously part of society, but not completely. They were sort of on the fringes of the culture. And we still have that today also. You know, we'll have that saying, children are the future of the church. When we say children are the future of the church, do you know what we're saying? They're not really part of the church right now. The only reason why they're valuable is because of the potential they offer. Maybe eventually they'll be important, but right now they're just off in the future somewhere. Or we have junior church. We send children away because they're not ready for real church. So they have a little junior church downstairs. Now, there are some congregations that the children are in junior church the entire worship service. We include our children here at Old Union for most of the worship service. We just send them downstairs for the most boring part, my sermon. And then, of course, we have children's time. And what are we saying when there is children's time in worship? That's their time, and the rest of the worship service isn't really for them. When we have children's time, we have to resist the temptation of turning the kids into props. You know, let's have the kids come up here and tell a cute story, and we get to hear how funny they are, and that makes us all feel better. But that turns children's time into our time, rather than a time for them to learn and grow. Now, I'm not saying we should do things differently. What I'm saying is we should be aware of exactly what it is we're doing. The Old Testament reading that Becky did for us discusses the importance of the Jewish law that God gave to Moses. This was on Mount Sinai. This is after the Israelites had been freed from slavery in Egypt. They spent 40 years in the wilderness, and now they're just about ready to move into the promised land. And in Deuteronomy 6, we get this reminder to keep and honor the law of God. He says, talk about it at home and on the road. Put it on your forehead and on your hands. Write it on the doorposts of your heart, of your houses. Now, some Jews do that literally. Were you guys able to hear the microphone with the children? Okay. So a mezuzah, if you see the one picture there, that's the thing on the side of the door. And I have one of those on the door going into my study. And inside is a little slip of paper that says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind." And so they literally have it on the doorpost of their house. And they also have what they call phylacteries. You see that little box on the guy's forehead? And sometimes they'll have it on their right hand. And inside of that is a little piece of paper where they are literally taking it to carry God's law with them. I think, though, what's more important than literally doing this is figuratively carrying God's law with us. Having it in our head. Always be thinking about it. On our hands, always be doing it. On the doorposts of our houses, reminders, touchstones for every part of our life to remember what God has done. And so what we remember in Deuteronomy, what the people remember, is that they were freed from slavery. They were led into a land of blessing, and God claimed them as his own people. Honoring the law, or following the law, is a way to honor God, to express gratitude to him, to live as he desires. And Deuteronomy 6 tells us, if you do this, then God's blessings will continue. So where do the children come into all of this? There's two places. If you were listening carefully to Becky as she was reading, there are two places where we hear about children. First was in verse 7. Impress them, that is, the commandments, impress them on your children. Impress. And the image you might get in mind is a lump of clay or wax, and then you push something into it to leave a mark on it. That's what it's talking about. Impress it into the children. Although a better translation of impress would be to incise it. In other words, to cut into it, to bite into it, to actually cut a mark into the children so that they are marked with God's commandments. Push the law into the children. Press it upon them so they're marked by it, and it leaves a lasting impression on them. Now, the image of children here we get is that they're rather passive. They're just a lump of clay that you push or you mark or you impress something onto. And on the one hand, that is true. Children are very impressionable, figuratively and literally. They pick things up from us very quickly. Sometimes they might pick it up too quickly. Sometimes children will repeat those words that you accidentally said in front of them, and then you get embarrassed by it. But also, they are very impressionable positively. In one of the churches that I served before I came to Old Union, there was a little 4-year-old girl who could recite the Apostles' Creed like no one's business. I don't think her parents sat her down and taught it to her, but from the time she was born, she was in the pew, and every Sunday she heard the words of the Apostles' Creed. I doubt she understood 90% of it at that point, or even 99% of it, but it had left an impression upon her. This is what sociologists would call becoming enculturated. Society continues, our culture continues as we pass it on to the next generation. It is easy for each generation to look at the one after it. And I don't care which generation you're part of. The generation before you looked at your generation and said, where did we go wrong? What parts of our culture did we fail to pass along to our children? But is that all children are? Just a blob of clay that you shape and form and leave an impression on? Are children not really fully part of the church? They're not ready to actively participate. They're just lumps sitting there. Now, there's more to children than that, and that's the second thing that we learn in the passage Becky read for us in verse 20. Now a child isn't the passive blob. Now the child is initiating a conversation. When your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations and decrees and laws the Lord our God has commanded you? This is how you're to answer. And then it goes on with that. So here we see the child is in an interesting role. The child, of course, is part of the Israelite society, but not completely integrated into it. The child is still kind of on the fringes, and we get a hint of that by looking at the pronouns of this. The child asks, what is the meaning of stipulation and decrees of the laws the Lord our God has commanded? So he's my God too. I'm part of the our. But then look at the other one. What is the meaning of all this that the Lord our God has commanded you? Meaning I'm not really part of this part yet. So I'm kind of part of you, but I'm not really part of you. I'm in some ways I'm on the outside looking in. This, I think, is where we run into the problem with written language. We miss the tone of voice. What is the meaning of all this? Is what the child asks. Does he ask it innocently with curiosity? What is the meaning of all this? Or does he ask it as a critical challenge? What's the meaning of all this? If it's curiosity, what's the meaning of this? Then the child is demonstrating an openness and a desire to be included. In essence, they're saying, please, tell me more. I want to be part of this great faith that is surrounding me. I know I'm missing something. I'd like to find out what it is. But if it's the other tone of voice, a challenge, what's the meaning of all this? It's not the challenge meaning to demolish or destroy. It's not an adversarial challenge. It's not as though the child is some outsider, some pagan from some other nation who's demanding the Jews explain what they're up to. You need to give me a justification or a logical defense for your faith, or else it'll all collapse. No, that's not what the child's challenge is. Because remember, The child is part of the culture, part of the family. So it's a challenge from within. The child is, again, saying, I want to understand. I don't get this. I want your help. This is similar to what happened in the New Testament reading, when the Ethiopian official was riding in his chariot, and God sent Philip to be beside him. And the Ethiopian asked him, what does all this mean? He wasn't asking to be challenging Philip, as though, I want to rip this apart. He wanted to learn more about it. Not to argue and debate, but to be included. And their conversation ended with baptism, which is our sacrament of including people into the family of God. What is the meaning of all this? The benefit of this question is not only for the child, so the child can learn and understand the faith, but it's a benefit for us as we answer the question, because the best way to learn something is to explain it to someone else. The best way to understand something is to teach it to someone else, because it forces you to put into words what might otherwise be sort of some vague concept that you have a general idea what it is, but you can't really put it into words. And our faith is full of words like that. Words like discipleship and justification and redemption and Trinity and incarnation and salvation. My guess is we all sort of have a vague general idea of what each of these words mean, and other words like this. But if I were to come up to you, if someone were to come to you and say, what does discipleship mean? Or what does redemption mean? Would you be able to express it to them in words? Would you be able to answer that question? Some of you are shaking your heads no. So that is part of the challenge here. It's not only for the child to learn more, but for us, in order to teach it to them, for us to learn more about our faith as well. Now, the answer at that time, what is the meaning of this? At the time that Deuteronomy was written, as the Israelites were getting ready to go into the promised land, the answer of it, the meaning of all this law, is that who we are is based upon what we do. And this is who we are. This is what Deuteronomy goes on to tell you. This is how you answer your son or your daughter. We are the people that God has saved. We are the people who have seen God's great wonders. We are the people that God has led into a blessed place. It's a little bit different, but that's exactly the same thing that we can tell children or others who would ask us, what's the meaning of your faith? We can say that we are the people that God has saved, not by rescuing us from slavery in Egypt, but by rescuing us from our sin and our brokenness through Christ's death on the cross. What is the meaning of all this? We are people who have seen God's great wonders. Not the parting of the Red Sea like the ancient people did, but we have seen God do great wonders within our own lives and the lives of others around us. And as we are acting in God's name, we're seeing God doing things that we would never be able to do ourselves. What is the meaning of all this? We are the people that God is leading into a blessed place. For us, it's not the promised land flowing with milk and honey, but the blessed place that God is leading us to is his kingdom. That's the answer. So this passage, talking about children, it does more than tell us how we should treat Eliza and Grayson and Jaden and Gabriel and Peyton and Chloe and the rest of the kids in the church. It does tell us that, but it's more than that. It also goes beyond telling us how we should interact with the children in our families, although it includes them. Remember, I was saying the children back in those times were people who were part of the Jewish culture and faith, but kind of on the fringes, not really fully part of it. We have a lot of people like that today, don't we? People who are on the fringes of the Christian family. And in our culture, the number of people on the fringes is growing. Pollsters like to call them the duns and the nuns. The duns are the people who might have grown up in church, but they're done with it now. And the nuns are the people who never even came into church in the first place. And this is the fastest growing part of our American society now. Now, Christianity is enough a part of our American culture that everyone to some extent encounters bits and pieces of it here and there. And there are some people in our society who are hostile or adversarial to our faith, but there are others, and I would say many, many others, who simply don't understand. They want to understand, and they might ask you a question so they can discover more about it. Perhaps they're going to ask you because they want to be more included into the family of God. And this is a form of evangelism. Someone is going to ask you the question, what is the meaning of all this? What does it mean to be a Christian? Why do you go to church? What's the Bible all about? The questions can be all sorts of things like that. Why do you care so much about Jesus? Your answer to that question is a form of evangelism. I'm going to tell you a story from my father. Some of you know, in the early 1950s, my father and mother were medical missionaries in Indonesia. For most of the time, my father was working in a hospital in Bandung, one of the major cities in Indonesia. But 2 days a week, he went to a town called Sumedang. The church in Sumedang had established a clinic, and my father went there 2 days a week to help staff their medical clinic. This is a picture of the clinic today. It's still in existence. I don't think that's the building that was there in the 50s. This is from my father's memoirs, the way he described part of what happened in Sumedang. The church needed permission from the public health official to operate the clinic. He was very leery of the whole setup. Sumedang is a rather strict and orthodox Muslim area, and the doctor was concerned about a Christian influence. At last, he was convinced to give his permission for the sake of the population of his district under one condition. There was to be no evangelizing, no spreading of Christian teachings. The church leaders accepted that condition with one added question. If someone would ask a question, would they be allowed to give an answer? The response came, yes, that would be allowed. Having heard that, that is my father, I was sent to Jakarta, 4 hours driving one way, where there was a Christian publishing center. I was loaded up with small tracts and several large posters. A church elder had the posters hung on the walls in the major waiting area, where folks who had already paid and registered were waiting to be seen. He had the tracts on a table, and he functioned as the usher of the clinic, so he stood there the whole 8 hours the clinic was open. People waiting their turn, seeing the posters, might ask him about them and explain what they meant. And we did have permission to answer questions. Sometimes he might refer to a tract for those who could read. Everyone in the room, of course, would hear the questions and answers. It was a series of Bible instructions twice a week by an elder of the Sumedang church, and each time to a new audience. So what are you going to do? Are you going to be like Philip and run alongside of a chariot so you can hear the person ask, what does this mean? Are you going to be like an elder of an Indonesian clinic, sitting in the waiting area, waiting for someone to say, what's that mean? How are you going to position yourself? Where are you going to put yourself so that someone will ask you that question? Would you pray with me, please? Lord God, we are grateful for all of your people, for those who are well established in the church. But this morning, we especially thank you for those who are on the fringes, on the margins, those who know a little bit, but would like to know more. Through us, Lord, send your message. Send the sweet aroma of your gospel into every soul.